It's been a long time since I found a book that was so interesting, so enthralling, so tailored exactly to my interests that I couldn't wait to finish it and slammed through it in record time. I mean, look at the cover to this thing. The moment I saw it, I knew I had to read it, but once I read the blurb, well, the book was already in my shopping cart and on its way here. Nakimesama. The roommate of Kurasaka Naoto's first love from high school, Sayoko, suddenly shows up at his door. She's lost contact with her and wants him to go back to her hometown, Inakami village in Hokkaido, to look for her. However, it seems Sayoko has been chosen as a shrine maiden for a ritual and is unable to see them. They decide to stay in the village for a while, but they notice someone strange lurking around the shrine. Not only that, but corpses are also showing up one after the other in such a state that no human could have possibly done. If you're here on this channel, I have to assume that at least sounds vaguely interesting to you, if not extremely. Of course, this book is currently only available in Japanese, and I'll leave a link to it in the description if you want to grab a copy for yourself, but that's why I'm here to talk about it. There will be spoilers all throughout this video, but I'll mark anything that spoils the twists and endings, so you can still avoid them if you want to grab the book for yourself, or potentially wait for an English version somewhere down the line. That said, let's dive in and take a look at this amazing book. Feel free to check the chapters for this video if there are any sections you want to avoid or skip ahead to. I'll label everything so you can avoid potential spoilers. So, what is Nakimesama about? It opens in dramatic fashion with a woman crying into a video camera about something terrible that has happened. Something they shouldn't have done. "Don't come near this village," she cries over and over. Why did they do this? Lights appear in the forest behind her and something growls nearby. The woman is then dragged into the trees, screaming about a murderer. Cut to our main protagonist, Kurasaka Naoto. There's a stranger at his door, a woman by the name of Arakawa Yayoi. It seems that her roommate, Ashihara Sayoko, has gone missing. And who is Sayoko? She's Naoto's first love, his girlfriend from high school. They broke up a while ago though, so he's a little confused as to why Yayoi is here. It seems Sayoko returned to her family's hometown, Inakami village, about an hour outside of Sapporo 3 weeks ago, but she hasn't heard from her since. Sayoko's parents died in a car accident 2 years earlier, and she's an only child, so her aunt and grandfather back in Inakami are the only family she has left. Sayoko claimed she would only be gone for a week, so Yayoi is worried. Neither of the ladies have any friends or family around, and Sayoko often spoke of Naoto, her high school love, so that's why she's here. Will he help? Of course, Naoto still has feelings for his long-lost love, so of course he will. Naoto is surprised Sayoko never mentioned anything about her family or Inakami to him. Yayoi doesn't know much either, but apparently Sayoko's parents stopped visiting their family a while back because we won't let them make you a shrine maiden. She ran into her aunt and grandfather at their funeral, however, and they invited her back to the village. They told her of a ritual that takes place once every 23 years, so Yayoi has deduced Sayoko's disappearance has to be because of that. And after a long drive, the pair finally arrive at the village. Cut to Sayoko herself, the other star of this novel. She has indeed been preparing for the ritual all this time, and she's not allowed to see anyone other than her cousin Kumi as she undergoes the cleansing ritual first. Her family runs the Ashihara shrine, and normally Kumi would have taken on the shrine maiden role, but for some reason they asked Sayoko instead. Because her cousin is an only child with no brother, she'll eventually have to marry someone to take over the family shrine, but her life has been a little sheltered, and as such, she's incredibly interested in Sayoko's exploits outside of the village, and, particularly, her relationship with former love Naoto. Meanwhile, Naoto and Yayoi find everyone in the village staring at them. They are outsiders, after all, but the village itself is more modern than they were expecting. They find the Ashihara house and meet Hidemi, her aunt, and Tatsuhiko, her grandfather. Sayoko is perfectly fine and well, but she cannot see them because she's in preparations for the upcoming festival. This festival is to celebrate Nakimesama, the local deity, and Sayoko's role is incredibly important, so they mustn't disrupt it. Now they know she's actually okay, Naoto and Yayoi are unsure of what to do. Hidemi convinces them to stay. The festival is only a few days away, and they did come all this way to see Sayoko after all. They agree, and that night meet people from all over the village at a sort of welcoming dinner. They're told to treat the house as their own, but there is one simple rule they must abide by. They mustn't go outside at night. Uh-oh. They are, of course, not told why. Naoto wakes up needing to pee and spots a figure in a white kimono. Thinking it might be Sayoko, he rushes outside after it. After chasing the figure through the forest, he ends up at Ashihara Shrine, but there quickly loses sight of the woman. He's then surprised by Yayoi, who followed him after seeing him leave and breaking the one rule they were told not to break. He thinks it's a silly rule, but Yayoi thinks it's probably just something to do with the festival. Suddenly, a high-pitched scream tears through the air, frightening them. Naoto wants to run, but Yayoi claims something is coming. She grabs him and pulls him underneath a nearby building before he can respond. There are footsteps on the gravel, and then dirty, damaged feet stop before them. One foot is wearing a shoe, while the other is bare. The skin is pale and covered in blood, with pieces of flesh coming off here and there. There's also a horrific smell in the air, but before the pair can do anything, again a scream tears through the air, forcing them to cover their ears. And then it's gone. What the hell was that? Sayoko struggles to eat the fried leftovers for breakfast the next morning, and Kumi seems kinda distant. She says some guests have arrived, and Sayoko wonders who on earth would want to come to a small village festival. Kumi asks her once again if she really wants to go through with this. If she wants to quit, now is her last chance. Sayoko is surprised. After all, the festival is only 2 days away. Why is Kumi asking her if she wants to quit all of a sudden? Well, it turns out that Eboshi Shinsuke, the son of the mayor, and man likely to be the next mayor, was the one who suggested Sayoko be the shrine maiden. Kumi thinks he has ulterior motives, and because he's a narcissistic little weirdo, nobody likes him. Either way, Sayoko intends to see the ritual out. It's too late to change now. Naoto and Yayoi bump into the elementary school principal while exploring the village. They met him at the party the night before, and he speaks of what a beautiful young woman Sayoko has grown into. He never taught her, but he did see her around when she was a child, as she used to play with his students whenever she visited. An angry young man then bumps into them. Sumita Takekiyo. He's raging that he wasn't picked as the bridegroom for the festival, and Shinsuke was instead. Nobody loves Sayoko more than he does, so it should have been him. Naoto is, of course, confused, and then Takekiyo tries to pick a fight with him, insisting that he loves Sayoko the most. The principal drags him away before a fight breaks out, and the confused pair decide to briefly look around again before returning home. Back at the house, they spot two men they don't know. Sanuma Keisuke, who works for the editorial department of an occult magazine called Mist, and Nanaki Yushiro, an occult novelist. They apparently met in a nearby town and are here for the festival after hearing talk of it. But they can't find anywhere to stay, so they wonder if maybe Naoto couldn't convince the Ashiharas to let them stay too. It's a large house after all. Yushiro seems a little taken aback that Naoto has never heard of his novels and forces a signed copy of his latest book into his hands. The two men are fascinated by scary festivals held all over the country, which is why they're here. Most rituals start out as something very specific, after all, that makes sense only in the context of the area and history of the time. But as time moves on, that context is forgotten, and that's how they become the rituals we know today. Yoshiro wants to use the information about this festival for his next novel. That's what he does. Travels the country to uncover small-town truths and turn them into terrifying tales for sale. Of particular interest to Yoshiro is that Ashihara Shrine has no Goshintai, no sacred object that houses the Kamisama. This could be anything from a tree, to a rock, to a sword, and yet there's nothing in the shrine that even vaguely resembles one. Could it have been moved for the ritual? Naoto mentions Nakimesama, and the two men get even more excited. He promises to ask the family if they can stay, and then the men head off into town to ask around a little more. The Ashiharas agree to let the men stay, but Yayoi is particularly upset with them that night, and Naoto can't figure out why. She refuses to speak to either of them, and just stares hatefully at them throughout dinner. The men try to pressure the family to speak of the festival in Nakimesama, but nobody seems comfortable giving answers. Things get even more weird when they mention the lack of a sacred object, and at this, the family gets upset and tells them that they're welcome to stay as guests, but stop asking rude questions. Suddenly, Naoto remembers that figure he saw at the shrine that night. Could that horrifying, evil presence have been Nakimesama? There's no way the village worships such an evil being, right? No way. Back in Sayoko's isolated hut, Kumi reveals she heard the family talking about Shinsuke. Apparently, he's going to force Sayoko to stay in the village after the festival and make her marry him. Kumi is most upset and tells Sayoko she needs to stand up for herself. After all, she's still in love with Naoto, right? They speak a little more of their relationship, and apparently they broke up because of issues Sayoko was having with a stalker, Hazama Seiji. He was a classmate who wouldn't take no for an answer, and stalked her for quite some time. Sayoko tried to keep this from Naoto so as not to bother him, but it mentally and physically wore her down. She doesn't want to think about it anymore, but she struggles to sleep, so she decides to step out for some cool night air. Back in the house, Naoto is also struggling to sleep. He mulls over what he saw that night. Oddly, Yayoi claims to have not seen anything, which he finds especially odd. As he gets up to go to the toilet, again he sees a woman in white. He follows her, but she disappears into a dead end. Keisuke and Yushiro suddenly appear behind him, looking like they're about to go outside. Naoto reminds them of Hidemi's rule, but they don't recall her ever telling them such a thing. Weird. Why did she tell Naoto and Yayoi but not them? Either way, the men want to check out the shrine again, and Naoto agrees to join them. But they don't get far before they all hear that horrifying scream again, freezing them on the spot. They continue in the direction of the screams and, once they end, find themselves in front of the Kawazoe family store. There, right in front of them, they discover a grisly sight. It's like a massive balloon has popped, covering the sidewalk and shudders in blood. A body leans against the wall, and they realize it's Satoshi, the owner's son, who they spoke to earlier that day. His eyes are missing, as though something tore right through his skull to rip them out. No human could have done such a thing. It had to be the owner of that screech, but what on earth is it? The next morning, the entire village is in an uproar. Kumi and Sayoko are told to continue with the cleansing ritual. Nothing is allowed to cloud Sayoko's feelings or mind. Sayoko asks her grandfather if what they said about Shinsuke wanting to marry her is true. He tries to shake her off and reminds her to just focus on the ritual, but she pushes him. He gets angry. Yes, their marriage has already been agreed upon. She should be grateful. She is one of them after all, and the Eboshis are a great family. Now, focus on the ritual and worry about that later. Naturally, Sayoko doesn't want to marry a stranger. She can't stop thinking of Naoto, her first love, and she grabs a keychain hanging off her bag and squeezes it. It was the first thing they bought as a couple, and it remains the most precious thing in the world to her. The only thing Sayoko wants right now is to see him. Be damned with the ritual. She falls into bed and cries. Everyone else in the village, meanwhile, is dealing with the discovery of Satoshi's body. The three men are questioned about the scene, but Naoto thinks it odd that nobody seems surprised or curious about the horrific screams they heard. It seems likely that Satoshi, who only just recently returned to the village after things with his wife and job went south, heard the screams as well and went outside to check them. Then, he was horribly murdered. So why does nobody care about the screams? Things take an even stranger turn when the police officer, Kawamura, informs the men he won't be alerting the city police. The festival simply must go on, and if the police arrive, it will be disrupted. Of course, this is simply unfathomable to the three men. A man died here. That's more important than a festival. Takekiyo, the man Naoto met the day before at the school, then charges through the crowd and takes their phones. Outsiders have no business meddling. If they don't want to be kicked out of the village entirely, they need to shut up and let the village do its thing. Naoto considers leaving, but then he won't be able to see Sayoko, so he begrudgingly shuts up. The festival is tonight. It must go on. Everyone gets to work. This time, Yayoi asks Naoto about why he and Sayoko broke up. Was it the incident with the stalker? He confirms it was. They tried to ignore it at first, but he got more and more persistent, and even lied to others about the two of them going on dates. Sayoko then stopped talking about it to Naoto, perhaps to protect him, but he took it as her not trusting him, so they grew apart and then broke up. Yayoi calls him out on leaving Sayoko alone to deal with her stalker, but he knows what he did was wrong. That's why he wants to see her again. When he turns to look at Yayoi, he's surprised by the look on her face. Completely blank, almost hollow other than an emotionless smile on her face. What on earth? The festival begins, but technically there are two. The pre-festival, which is your run-of-the-mill summer festival you might see anywhere, and then the real festival, which takes place at midnight. This is the one held every 23 years, and only a few in the village are privy to it. Yayoi and Naoto enjoy the pre-festival and notice some villagers sending little boats down a river. There appear to be names written on the sails, but the villagers give them nasty looks when they see them, like they shouldn't have seen this. Now, this boat ritual tends to take place at night, so why are they doing it during the day? Is it because of what Hidemi said about staying indoors at night? But also, the names on the boats. No way. The pair go home and nap, and 4 hours later, Naoto is woken up by Yushido. Keisuke is missing, but his stuff is still here, so he likely went somewhere by himself. They agree he must have gone to the shrine to investigate the ritual before it starts. Naoto wants to know why Yushido is really there though. Yes, he lied a little, but he really is there for research. He already knew of Nakimesama, and that's exactly why he's here. To experience it firsthand. That's the only way to truly convey the terror through his books. He suspects, like Naoto, that Nakimesama isn't actually a kami-sama, but he's not sure what. He intends to find out though, and also discover why the villagers worship the creature. As for the name, he believes it means either crying or wailing woman, like those screams they keep hearing. The two men arrive at the shrine and see a figure slumped on the ground in the distance, covered in blood. They're too late. Judging by the clothes, it's Keisuke, but they also see something in white searching the ground around him. It has incredibly long arms and legs, almost like a stretched out human, and then it screams. Nakimesama. Nakimesama screams again and runs off. They approach Keisuke, but his eyes haven't been torn out. Seems his throat was cut. This is entirely different to Satoshi, meaning it likely wasn't Nakimesama that did this, but the villagers. They tell the Ashihara family, but again, the ritual is most important. They'll deal with it after, and they should keep quiet and not get in the way. They point out the differences to Satoshi's death, but again, Tatsuhiko refuses to speak on the matter. Naoto realizes the villagers are scared. Maybe they don't worship the creature, but rather are terrified of it. Everyone goes back to their rooms to rest before the ritual, and Naoto tells Yayoi that none of this is her fault. His heart races as he looks at her, and he almost feels like he's betrayed Sayoko. Before long, there's a knock at the door, and he answers it, thinking it her, but it's Yushiro. He's still trying to come up with answers. He fears this is no ordinary ritual. The villagers literally fear for their lives. They're trying to pacify Nakimesama, and if it goes wrong, they'll all die. He did some digging into the history of the area, but was unable to find anything about the creature. All he found was some information about the Tenmei eruption in 1783, which was part of one of Edo's 4 great famines, in which many thousands all over the country died, including here in Inakami. He suspects that during this disaster, the villagers may have turned to divine help, and got it in the form of Nakimesama. That's why they continue the ritual. As long as they worship Nakimesama, the village will be safe. But why is she here now? He found some interesting information on Keisuke's PC about how the ritual apparently already took place in February of this year. But it failed. He suspects that failure actually summoned Nakimesama, and she has been wandering around the village ever since. Tonight is their last chance to carry out the ritual again and finally pacify her. If they don't, well... It seems, like Yushiro, Keisuke also knew more than he let on. He was friends with a freelance writer by the name of Otomo Takuya, and Takuya visited the village in February with his girlfriend, Tsukahara Aiko, who worked as his cameraman. They attended the festival and were never seen again. Keisuke started investigating his friend's disappearance, and that was how he discovered Inakami village and the ritual. But before they disappeared, Takuya and Aiko uploaded a video onto the internet. Keisuke saved it before it was deleted, and it shows their final message to him, recorded on Aiko's phone. It's the same footage from the prologue. The woman who was dragged into the trees was Aiko. They saw something cruel, something terrible, and they did something they shouldn't have, but she's dragged away before she's able to say what. This part intrigues Yushiro. What shouldn't they have done? He doesn't think Aiko was referring to the ritual specifically, but something else. Something that made it fail. The men then head to the dead end where Naoto saw the woman in white disappear. Turns out there's a secret door. They head in and follow a cave-like tunnel before ending in a tiny white room with tatami flooring. It appears to be a dressing room for brides, with gorgeous kimonos hanging on the walls, as well as various Shinto ritual tools, mirrors, etc. There's a mirror, but it's placed so that people on the outside can't look in. He realizes they must be in the building behind the shrine's main hall, judging by the distance they walked. Is Sayoko really here then? Yushiro seems to finally understand what's going on, but before he's able to explain, both men are knocked out from behind. 11 p.m. Sayoko is dressed and ready. She walks with Kumi to the now empty main house, then over to the shrine where everyone is waiting. Sayoko remembers what her grandmother told her when she was alive. The villagers owe their lives to Nakimesama. That's why they hold the festival every year, but also the special festival once every 23 years. She never thought much of it as a kid, but now here she is in the main role. Everything depends on her. If she doesn't get into the right mindset and get close to Nakimesama, it'll fail. Her male partner is supposed to help with that, but it's Shinsuke. A man she never really thought much of. Although, admittedly, there isn't anyone in the village who she thinks would be better either. Kind of a lose-lose situation here. But the closer the pair are, the better the chance of success. She wishes it had been Naoto instead. In the main hall, she sees her uncle and grandfather. Her parents knew this would happen, and it was why they took her away. Yet she came back anyway. Well, if it protects Kumi, then fine, she'll do it. The ritual's success is all that matters. Kumi makes her promise that after the ritual, they'll run away and see Naoto, and she agrees. Get this done, then see Naoto. Easy. Naoto himself wakes up and finds himself tied to a lantern on the shrine grounds. Yushiro is also tied up in front of him. Before long, various villagers arrive alongside Tatsuhiko, dressed in all white. Naoto thinks he looks more like a tengu than a priest. He suddenly remembers Yayoi and asks if they killed her too. She was never here to begin with, Tatsuhiko oddly replies. What does that mean? From here on out, there will be massive spoilers that reveal what's been going on this whole time, so if you'd rather avoid them, feel free to skip ahead to the review section. Otherwise, prepare yourself for answers to all your questions. Everyone laughs and Yushiro remarks that he still doesn't realize, Everything was an act from the very beginning. There's no sacred object here because there's no Kamisama here. The ritual also isn't to pacify Nakimesama, but rather to seal her. The village is cursed with doing so every 23 years. But what is Nakimesama? Don't her white clothes look familiar, like that of a traditional Japanese bride? In the old way of thinking, when a woman got married, her old life died, and she started anew as a wife, daughter, and eventually mother in her new family. White was associated not just with weddings, but death as well. Which means her ritual is a marriage to the dead, of course. The practice is thought to have started in China many centuries ago, but it was also a common practice in the Tohoku area for parents who lost their children at a young age. To make them happy on the other side, they'd order votive tablets and record a marriage for the deceased on them, something they were unable to achieve while alive. Recent years have seen this ritual used in scary stories and urban legends, but in reality, it was a coping mechanism and little more. Yushiro theorizes this Nakimesama ritual is similar to that, but also a little different. Here, a shrine maiden is used to literally summon her, and it is Nakimesama, in the shrine maiden's body, who marries the male partner. Because Nakimesama is able to experience marriage, she is appeased or sealed for another 23 years and won't cause the village harm. In other words, this marriage ritual is a way of exorcising her, and after the ritual she returns to her yorishiro, another type of sacred object that's kept in the building behind the main hall, that bridal room. Tatsuhiko begrudgingly confirms he is correct. The shrine maiden is simply the vessel, and it's Nakimesama who gets married, pacified, then disappears for another 23 years. According to his great-grandfather, there was once a girl in the village who died at a young age. The village was suffering from a famine, and when a shaman visited, he claimed the mountain Kamisama was angry at them. They had to appease it. To do so, they would need to hold a wedding ceremony, and they would need a young man and woman from the village, preferably a couple already dating, then summon the Kamisama into the girl's body and have them marry. A couple was chosen, but the young woman was sickly and died from the famine before the ritual could take place. Her parents, heartbroken, asked the shaman to summon the Kamisama into her body regardless, and he was so moved by their sorrow that he agreed. But the young man had already moved on, as he was never really into that girl in the first place, and he departed the village to be with someone else. The young girl's spirit was left to wander the village after the ritual failed to take place, and her anger turned her into a vengeful spirit. Her spirit eventually reclaimed the decaying flesh of her body and roamed the village night after night looking for the man who betrayed her. That was how she became Nakimesama. To deal with this new monster they created, the shaman revealed they'd have to continue that same marriage ritual to pacify her every 23 years. She was, after all, 23 years old when she died. So, if they succeed tonight, Nakimesama will leave the village alone for another generation. There's no need to worry though. It's not a real marriage, and Nakimesama isn't a real kamisama. She's simply an angry spirit, so this simple ritual is enough to appease her. Although, tonight's ritual is indeed a little different to usual. After all, Nakimesama is already wandering around the village, freed of her bonds, and she has killed several people already. They need to summon that monster into Sayoko's body. Can they guarantee her safety? Naoto regrets not forcing his way in to see her and taking her from the village right away, but a sudden scream tears through the air. Nakimesama is here. Naoto thrashes against his bonds, but Yushiro informs him that he's got one thing wrong. He's surprised he hasn't figured it out yet. He was never going to be able to take Sayoko away, but he is going to see her very soon, for better or worse. Naoto is confused, but then it hits him. The ritual failed in February. That means that shrine maiden was Sayoko. And that means the creature they've seen wandering around is her too. Flashback. Sayoko enters the shrine. Everyone fawns over how beautiful she is, and Shinsuke looks at her with creepy eyes that she ignores. Just finish the ritual and then run away in the morning with Kumi. Once it begins, she notices a small box on the altar. Her grandmother once told her it was Nakimesama's goshintai, her house, basically. It didn't mean much to her as a kid, but now she sees it again before her, only this time it's cracked. Black smoke seems to be coming from it, and that smoke works its way over to her, almost consuming her. Sayoko panics. It's Nakimesama. She's trying to take over her body, overwhelming her with feelings of rage, disgust, and hatred. She doesn't like it. Her skin is burning, and her very body itself rejects her. She refuses to allow this hateful being in. Her family urges her to let it happen, but she fights it. She screams for Naoto, rejecting Nakimesama with all her being, and then everything seems to stop. The ritual has failed, the villagers scream. All eyes turn to her, eyes full of hatred, anger, shame. They blame her, calling her an outsider, and she flees into the forest, ripping up her bridal gown. Running with wild abandon, she collapses in the mud. Why is this happening to her? She did everything for this village and still they blame her. She should never have come back. She grasps for her keychain, but it's gone. Fumbling around, she realizes it's hanging on a nearby branch, dangling over a cliff. She reaches for it, but then slips, tumbling into the darkness. Where is she? When is she? Dream? Reality? Something else? Are these her memories? Let's break up. Those words she never wanted to hear. Naoto won't listen to her, however. He doesn't care that everything with Seiji is just a misunderstanding. He's tired and wants to move on. She's too clingy and he's over it. He hits her. She apologizes, but he hits her again, sending her flying into the bed frame. This is all her fault, and she's just so damn annoying. It's not the first time he's hit her, but usually he's so gentle and kind to her after. But not this time. It's Yoko, isn't it? It doesn't matter. He's done and never wants to see her again. He grabs his bag and a dog keychain falls off. She promises to fix it, but he really doesn't care. She wanted it, not him. I can't deal with you anymore. Those are his last words to her, and as he leaves, he takes a part of her heart with him. A part that can never be filled again, except by Naoto himself. When she wakes up, she finds herself on the altar in the shrine, but she's unable to move. She's in great pain and realizes her arm and fingers are broken. Kumi's telling her it's going to be fine. They'll do the ritual again, then they'll get her a doctor. She just has to endure it a little longer. The ritual kicks off again, but Sayoko is terrified and lost. Why is nobody helping her? Why does nobody care about her? She feels Nakimesama trying to take over her body again, but this time, despite her best efforts, it's successful. She finds the power to stand up, but everyone looks at her in terror. They scream, but the sounds are so loud, so annoying. She hates them. She hates the way they sound, and she hates the way they look at her. She tries to speak, but the villagers panic, calling her a monster. The only sound that comes out of her mouth is a horrifying scream. In a rage, she sticks her fingers into her own eyes and pulls them out. Now, she doesn't have to look at these horrible villagers and see their hatred for her ever again. Someone nearby won't shut up, so she tears his eyes out too, and then his insides, like she saw some local boys cruelly playing with an animal once do. She shoves the insides into her mouth. They taste delicious. The present. Yayoi suddenly appears. She's not dead. But Yoshido suddenly understands that earlier comment about Yayoi never existing. Who does Naoto think really went to all the trouble of getting him to come to the village? Who made him think Sayoko was still here? And who knew of Sayoko's feelings for him? That's right, Ashihara Kumi, of course. Kumi blames Sayoko's rejection of Shinsuke for the ritual failing, but that's not all. She also blames that rider and his cameraman girlfriend. You see, they snuck around the village without permission and damaged the Goshintai. That made Nakimesama unstable, got her emotions all riled up instead of allowing her to rest in peace. That was why Sayoko fought so hard against her and why the ritual ultimately failed. If that pair didn't mess with things, then the ritual would have gone off without a hitch. That was why she killed them. Now, suddenly he understands Yayoi's, no, Kumi's reaction to the two men when they arrived. Why nobody warned them not to go outside at night. They didn't care if they died. They only needed Naoto for the ritual. After Sayoko killed Shinsuke, Kumi went out and found Takuya and Aiko and killed them too. Her one mistake was not getting to them before they uploaded that video on the internet. But this was all their fault, so she doesn't regret killing them one bit. And yes, she killed Keisuke as well. He shouldn't have been sniffing around, looking to mess up the ritual a second time. The villagers have spent the last 6 months living in terror. It ends tonight. But Yoshido laughs. Do they really think that this is what Nakimesama wants? Fake weddings every 23 years. Do they think she hasn't noticed? Maybe these rituals are actually having the opposite effect. She's not being pacified. She's becoming more self-aware and far more angry. But either way, Naoto is about to see Sayoko again, although he probably never imagined it being like this. But he claims that despite being stupid in the past, he really does love her, and he still wants to see her again. Kumi heard of how he used to physically abuse her cousin, so all this time she's been fighting the urge to kill him as well, but only because he's necessary for the ritual. She wants him to prove, once and for all, that he's not lying. And almost as if on cue, a scream tears through the air. Nakimesama, or Sayoko, or both, appears. Her body lurches with each step, the air full of the smell of decay. Her kimono is covered in blood, she's missing a shoe, her skin is peeling off. Her arms and legs are abnormally long and she no longer has eyes, just like her victims. Yoshido then realizes that's the origin of her name. It doesn't mean crying woman, it means no eyes. Kumi informs Nakimesama that they've brought Naoto, and he calls to her. I'm over here. She turns to him and puts her hands on his face, almost as though to rip out his eyes. He freezes in fear. This isn't Sayoko. It's a monster. But her hands are gentle, and he finally apologizes. Then he spits out the words he wanted to say all along. Let's get married. Kumi grabs a newly made box and takes something out of it. Sayoko's eyes. This is Nakimesama's new home, but for now she needs to let Sayoko take over. She puts her eyes back in and transforms back into Sayoko right before their eyes. They get ready to perform the ritual once again, but then Sayoko attacks. Or is it Nakimesama? Or both? Either way, she attacks Kumi and brutally rips her head off, and then kills the rest of her family one by one in increasingly violent ways. Villagers flee. The shrine is set on fire. Yushido frees himself with a pocket knife, but Naoto refuses to go. He's going to remain with Sayoko this time. She's still somewhere inside that monster. He approaches her, but she seems nervous of him. She's still angry at him, right? Then she should kill him, because he's otherwise not going anywhere. He moves to embrace her, but she pushes him away. The shrine comes crashing down around them, swallowing Sayoko as Naoto falls to the ground outside. He's alive, but the same can't be said for Sayoko. He screams. 2 weeks pass. The police struggle to understand what happened in Inakami village and, of course, they don't believe Yushido's stories of Nakimesama. They do find Takuya and Aiko's bodies in the mountains, however, so they chalk the shrine incident up to the villagers having an argument about what to do about their deaths. The mass media also catches wind of what happened, but it doesn't make much of a wave and is simply reported as some weird serial killings by a cult in a cold, desolate village. The truth remains known only to Yushido and Naoto. Yushido still intends to turn all of this into a novel, but before he parts ways with Naoto, he asks him if he really did intend to die with Sayoko. He did, but none of that matters now. She's gone. The men say their goodbyes and return to their normal lives, but Naoto can't stop thinking about what Yushido said about the ritual, how it wasn't really doing what the villagers thought it was doing. She wasn't being pacified. Her anger was growing each time, and she was simply biding her time, waiting to strike. And once the opportunity struck, she took it. The damaged box. Sayoko's conflicted feelings. This was the perfect opportunity to free herself and find someone who really would love her for who she really was. Maybe it was Nakimesama herself who used Takuya and Aiko for her own benefit. She made them damage the box, and then she took advantage of Sayoko's confused mental state to attack the villagers as well. All for one reason: to set her free, to find true love. And when she felt that love when she pushed Naoto away from the falling pillar, News plays in the background. The body of a 24-year-old worker from Sapporo was found on Mount Teinu today, identified as Kurasaka Naoto, who went missing 2 weeks earlier. His girlfriend is also missing, and there are fears for her safety. Kurasaka Naoto. What a piece of shit that guy was. Trash, who not only laid hands on Sayoko, but cheated on her too. He still remembers the feeling of his neck as he squeezed the life out of him. By the time Kumi showed up at the door pretending to be Yayoi, Naoto was already dead. Cut into pieces in the bathroom, as he pretended to be him at the door. Yet he had no idea that all this was waiting for him. He can't blame them for trying to deceive him. After all, he was doing the exact same thing. And it led to him meeting Sayoko again. And thankfully, nobody ever realized he wasn't Naoto. Except for Yushido. At some point, probably right at the very end, when Nakimesama looked at him in surprise, he realized the truth. But with everything being over, well, it didn't really matter at that point, did it? It was also after that point that Yushiro stopped calling him Naoto-kun. So, yes, Naoto isn't his name at all. His real name is... There's a knock at the door. A young woman introduces herself as his new neighbour. She hands him a present, and he introduces himself in return. I'm Hazuma Seiji. If she ever needs anything at all, don't hesitate to ask. They are neighbours after all. He returns inside and the room smells of decay. There's a box sitting on the table and he smiles. Yes, this new neighbour will be perfect for the real ritual. Now that she's free of the village, it's time for actual freedom. Let's stay together forever, Sayoko. 2 eyeballs stare back at him from the box. The easiest way I can think of to describe this novel in a quick, simple sentence would be Ni-channel creepypasta meets Fatal Frame, with more twists than a mountain road. Just when I thought I knew what was going on, the novel would throw yet another twist seemingly out of nowhere, but one that makes perfect sense once you finish the story and see how everything was expertly laid out. If you enjoy those big, sprawling Ni-channel creepypastas that see a bunch of friends visit some creepy, out-of-the-way village in the mountains and slowly find themselves drawn into a horrifying ritual, obviously this is the novel for you. If you enjoy the rituals of the Fatal Frame games, the deep dives into how things go wrong and the very human reasons behind the ghosts that haunt us, again, this is the novel for you. But even if you only have a vague interest in either of those things, if you're someone who enjoys a tightly plotted novel with well-placed twists, some obvious and some completely out of left field, again, grab the book. Learn Japanese just to read it. It really is fantastic. As I said at the start, it felt like this story was tailored specifically to my interests, and it never let me down. On the contrary, the more I read, the more interesting it got, and as I got closer to the end, I found myself unable to put the book down. I had to keep reading and reading so I could uncover just what exactly was going on with this creepy ritual, who on earth Nakimesama was, and finally see how this would end up for everyone. Needless to say, I did not see that final biggest of twists coming, but I love the implications behind those final few paragraphs as well. If you're entirely avoiding spoilers, then feel free to jump ahead here as I'll briefly talk about the ending. Spoilers incoming. It's right at the end we discover that Naoto wasn't actually Naoto all along. Just like Yayoi was actually Kumi, we discovered that Naoto was actually Seiji, Sayoko's stalker. Now, Naoto is also revealed to be a giant trash bag of a human being, so it's hard to feel bad for him. But the revelation that we've spent the entire novel not with him, but rather with Sayoko's stalker, who is still hunting her down, is a special kind of horrifying. But it gets even worse when you realize that he now has Sayoko's eyes. He also has Nakimesama's new Yorishiro, the box that houses her. He, like Yushiro, suspects that all along Nakimesama wanted to be free of the village to find true love, something she never got while she was alive. The novel never really makes it clear whether Sayoko and Nakimesama are 2 entirely separate beings or if they're now something combined, but either way, Seiji now has both. We know he stalked Sayoko and was largely the cause behind her breakup with Naoto. Seiji isn't a good man. He's a stalker and a murderer. And now he's in possession of both Sayoko and Nakimesama, or whatever combined being they might now be. And he's planning to carry out the ritual with another live human being, his new neighbor. He didn't free Nakimesama. He just moved her from being trapped in the village to now being trapped with him. And that to me is a far more horrifying ending than anything else they could have come up with. It seems like she got her wish, but then you realize that no, same prison, different cell. And Seiji has really been the one pulling the strings all along. I love how this story developed. It took just the right amount of time to set things up. It never dragged or went into unnecessary details, and the amount of twists ensured that the pacing was kept high alongside your interest. It became hard for me to put the book down because I had to know what happened next, and that's rare with my constantly wandering interest. In terms of the language itself, I don't think this book is that difficult to read if you're learning Japanese. It's certainly not easy, and you'll want to know a lot of Shinto-related terms, but if that's something you already have an interest in, then that shouldn't be a deterrent. I wouldn't say it's as easy as, say, an Otsuichi book, but I've certainly read some harder books as well. If you have some decent language skills behind you and the premise sounds interesting, I'd definitely pick this one up if you're looking for some extra reading material. You're unlikely to regret it. And interestingly, as I looked a little more into the book, it turns out that this is the first of a series that's basically a horror in Hokkaido verse by the author. Each novel is a standalone story, with the only things linking them being the fact that they take place in Hokkaido and that Yushiro, the horror novelist, is somehow involved. So, if that's something you're into, I'd recommend picking them up as well. I enjoyed this one so much that I definitely will be. If you enjoyed Shirai-san by Otsuichi, then this is somewhat similar in terms of vibe, but I'd call this one more Fatal Frame inspired, compared to Shirai-san's Ring inspirations. And if you've never read either, you'll be hard pressed to find a better duo than these two books. Pick them up, you won't regret it. I wish I could read both again not knowing what's coming. But that is Nakimesama. Honestly, one of the most interesting Japanese horror novels I've read in quite some time. I feel like horror stories set in and around festivals and creepy rituals have been on the rise in recent years, and if it's going to result in more stories like this one, I am definitely here for it. But what did you guys think of this one? Do you have any similar recommendations of your own? Let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you again next time.